Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. My name's Nader. In this video, I'd like to go over the mathematical operators in JavaScript. We're actually going to separate this video out from a different series of operators called the Boolean operators, since as I was making these videos, I realized there's quite a lot of content to split up between the two. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Okay. I'd like to start the video off with this drawing that I've made that kind of goes through a table of the different mathematical operators in JavaScript. So I mentioned that I'm going to split the videos up between the math operators and the Boolean operators. So this is just the mathematical operators. We'll do the Boolean operators in a totally separate video, as those are quite a lot more content to go along with it. So if you were scared in math class, like a lot of people were, don't worry, we'll go through this quite slowly together just so it really makes sense. We're not going to do any crazy math, and fancy computers are the ones that are good at doing the math for us, which is why we use them. We just need to kind of understand the concepts behind it to make it a bit easier on ourselves. So when it comes to these operators, there are kind of these 6 main operators. Let's just go through them one at a time. So this first one here in the first row is the addition operator. We'll actually code these out together shortly, but I just kind of want to conceptually set the groundwork. So in this one, we would do something like 1 plus 1, and then we would get a value. The second operator is the subtraction operator, or the minus sign. This one would just subtract 2 values. You would take the right hand value and subtract it out of the left hand value. So something like 5 minus 3, and we would get something like 2. Then we have the multiplication operator. So this is the star symbol. This is kind of like usually shift and 8, I believe, on most keyboards. And that is for multiplication. So this would be like the X. Normally you'd write it in math for the times or multiply symbol. But X is kind of a letter and reserved for things like variables and other things and letters in programming. So we need kind of a different symbol to signify that. And that's the kind of star symbol right here. So we could do something like 2 star 2, which is 2 times 2, and we get something like 4. So we'll do these in code so you can see how it works shortly. Then there's a division symbol. This in math looks quite different depending on how you kind of learn math. Usually it's kind of like one number over another number with a line in between. But again, we don't really have that in our keyboard or in programming. So the closest thing is actually this forward slash. Be careful with the direction of the slash when you're doing these operators. You can see that this is kind of I said it's a forward slash, so it's kind of tilting forward. There's another symbol, which is the backslash, which actually means something different. So we'll go over that when we code as well. But an example, this one might be something like 6 divided by 3, and we would get 2. Then there's the modulus operator, otherwise known as the remainder kind of operator. This one is quite tricky, so we'll do a couple of examples with this because this is kind of not really intuitive, and we don't really see this as much in math directly. We kind of deal with these other ones first usually, but this is kind of the remainder after we do a division. If there's, so whatever remainder there is, even if it's 0. So for example, if we did something like 7 and then this modulus with 3 goes into 7 2 times, but that's 6, and then we have 1 as the remainder. So in that case, that answer would actually be 1. And we'll do this in code just so you can see a couple examples of this shortly. This last one is actually kind of new to JavaScript. It's the exponentiation operator, which is for exponents. So it's like to the power of, so we could do something like 2 to the power of 2, we get 4, 3 to the power of 3, we get 9, and this is the kind of multiply, so 2 stars in a row in JavaScript to actually get this one working. So we'll look at a few kind of other ways we can use these shortly, but let's just get right to the code so you can kind of see some examples of how this works. So I'm just going to open up Visual Studio Code. I have a blank editor open for this kind of demo together. I encourage you to create a blank workspace so it's a bit easier to organize your code as well. I'm just going to create a new file. I'll call this math-operators.js. Perfect. So let's kind of flip back and forth between these so we can see them one at a time. But we'll start with addition. So we could do something like let age is equal to, and then we can do some math. So if I said like 10 plus 23. In this case, if I were to log out age, I would expect to get the number 33. Right? So let's just go ahead and do that. I'm going to open up my terminal. In other videos, I did terminal and then new terminal. If you have your terminal open in the secondary panel, like I set up in another video or in a different panel, you can actually just open up that panel here as well. What you'll notice is if I just, as kind of a side note, if I just keep clicking new terminal and then new terminal, I'll actually keep getting these terminals opened. If you do see that, eventually you kind of want to clean those up and just have so you have maybe 1 or 2 running. There are uses for having multiple of these running, but we won't get into that right now. So I'm just going to close those just so I have this one terminal running. And again, just make sure you're in the same folder as your code. So if I do an ls or a dir in Windows, I should see my file that I just made with you right now. So to run this file, I use node and then the name of the file, and I can use tab to autocomplete, press enter, and I indeed get 33, which is fantastic. So the computer can actually do math correctly. So don't use this to cheat on your math homework. We could kind of do a few more examples of this, but hopefully that's pretty self-explanatory. I encourage you to do a couple of these just to see how that works. But let's look at subtraction. We could do let's say points is equal to, let's say 50 points, and you want to subtract 17 points, and then we can log that out. You can try to do it in your head, but I'll just run this really quick, and you can see we get the same number, 33. If I change this to a different number, like say 19, I can prove to you that this is actually working as intended. I get 31, which is the right number. Okay, I believe that the next ones were multiplication and division, so let's look at those two. So we can say something like let score is equal to, let's say I have a score of 7 and I want to multiply that by 5. I can then console.log that out, let you do the math in your head. And if I run that, so let me just clear that so that we can see that above my bubble head. I get 35. These are all very close to each other. So maybe if I change this to, let's say, a larger number and I run that again, you can see that that indeed is the correct mathematics. You can do division. Division, I'll just point out a couple of interesting things about division once we do this. So let's say divide. And let's say I want to divide like evenly. So if I have like 100 and I divide it by 10, and I run this, you can see that I indeed get 10, which is the correct answer. I'm just going to clear this again so that we have enough space. But if I was to divide it by kind of something that's not evenly divisible, like in this case 13, and I run that, you'll see kind of a crazy number pop up, right? It's just like, wow, like this is very, very precise, pristine. I don't think you probably went this far in decimal places in your school when you're doing division. There's a lot of reasons for this. This is actually not exactly technically accurate because of how there's some limitations with how these numbers are represented inside the computer, but it's pretty close, especially out to several decimal places. It should be good enough for most computing purposes. There are ways to kind of shorten this and use it in different ways for different programs, which we'll get into as we start kind of building our knowledge of JavaScript together. But just be aware that if it doesn't evenly divide, it'll actually give you a decimal number as you would kind of want and expect, and it should be as precise as you need it for the most part. Okay. So that's addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Now kind of gets to the trickier ones, modulus and exponentiation. So modulus is, as I mentioned, the remainder of a division. So let's go with an easier example. Put this here just so it's super clear. Say mod. So if I was to do, say, an even division, so let's go, I think I mentioned earlier in the video, something like 6 mod 3, and I console log this out. I get 0. So if I did 6 divided by 3, I would get 2, right? But 6 mod 3 is 0. So why is that? Try to think about that for a second. This definitely takes some practice. It's kind of brain melting until you finally kind of do a couple of these examples. But in this case, 3 goes into 6 exactly 2 times, and there's no kind of leftover, there's no remainder, right? So if you were kind of do the long division like you might have done in elementary school or high school, like there's no remainder in this particular case. So we would actually get 0 remainder, which is what we get printed out. But if I try to make it so there is a remainder, so like let's say I do 7 mod 3. So try to think about what you would get in this case as a change. I'm just going to clear this. Once you've tried that out, I'll run that, and you can see that I get 1, right? So why is this? Because 3 goes into 7 2 times, which gives us 6, and then we have a remainder of 1. Okay, so just to kind of hammer this home a little bit, let's do 8 mod 3. Try to think about what that might be. Once you've done that, let's go through this one. This gives us 2. Right? So again, this is because 3 goes into 8 2 times, and then we have 2 left over, right? So we get 2 times is 6, and then we have 2 left over. 8 minus 6 is 2. And then finally, if we do 9, this we'll see is kind of wraps around again in this particular case. And if I run this, we'll get 0 again, because 3 goes exactly 3 times into 9. Okay, so that's kind of the trend. Try to think about how changing this second value for the modulus operator kind of would impact and give you a different range of numbers as a result. It's an interesting exercise. We'll get into this in the problem set videos as well. Okay, so that's modulus. Now for exponentiation, which is exponents. I'll call it exp. Let's do 4 to the power of 2. And let's console log that out. So before we print this out, try to think of what this might be. This is the same thing as saying 4 times 4. All right. So if we run that, we get 16. And if we change this to something like 3, this would be multiplying it by another 4. So this would be 4 times 4 times 4, 3 times, right? And clear that just so we have some space again, and we get 64. All right, so it's just a shortcut for exponents. There are other ways to do this as well, and this is a little bit newer in JavaScript, and it's just a bit cleaner and kind of aligns with some other programming languages that try to make it easier as well. Okay, great. So that is the basic mathematical operators in JavaScript and how they work together. What you'll notice as you're doing this as well is that for these math operators, there's kind of 2 sides to the operator, right? There's the left-hand side. So for example, if you look at plus, we have 10 on the left-hand side of the plus, and then 23 on the right-hand side of the plus. Okay, so there's always a left-hand side and a right-hand side when it comes to these operators. We can't like leave one of these out, otherwise we get an error because we need both. Very similar to how it works in math. So we need both left-hand side and the right-hand side for these specific mathematical operators to work. Okay. Now I'd like to go through some shortcuts that we can use to actually work through these as well. And these are the mathematical assignment operators. So what do I mean by this? This is a trickier concept, so we'll go through the examples in code as well together. However, we can actually achieve some of these things using shortcuts with special operators that are actually built into JavaScript to allow us to kind of shorten the amount of code that we write. I'll go through these examples shortly, but I'll just kind of explain them first so it makes sense as we have some context. So if we want to increment a variable by 1, we can use this plus. This is only for incrementing something by 1. And this might seem kind of weird. Just like, okay, well, why don't we kind of go like maybe plus and have 2 as an increment, or plus and just keep going, right? But it turns out that in programming and JavaScript, there's a lot of cases where we're going to need to increment something specifically by 1. We'll see this when we get to things like loops, but there's many other cases where just kind of you want to go up or down by 1 value. So the down case, which is the opposite of the plus case, the increment decrement, is the minus. So 2 minus signs right after each other will take a value that's a number and then subtract 1 from it right away. These cases here, they look really funky. The most common ones are kind of these 2 right here, which are the incrementing by a value and decrementing by a value. These can actually increment by 1 as well. It's just that these plus plus and minus minus usually are what you use for the 1 case, but you can use these for 1 as well. But we would do something like plus equals 5, and we could do like a plus 5 right away, minus equals 5 with minus 5. Multiply equals and divide equals all work the same way. It's just taking a value and then multiplying it by another value in this case, dividing it by a value in this case, modulus by value in the mod case, and exponentiating by value in the exponentiation case. So I know this is probably pretty confusing without examples, so kind of let's go through some examples really quick so it makes more sense. I'm actually going to make another file here just to clean this up. I'll call this assignment math.js. All right, so for the plus plus and minus minus case, let's see how those work first. So if I create a variable, let's call it points, and let's start it at 10. I can then do simply points plus plus, plus plus, just like that. And if I log out points, I'll get 11 in this case. So I'll run node, I'll run my assignments. You can see I do get 11. Right? So just to make this extra clear, this is the same as saying points is equal to points plus 10. Okay? Sorry, plus 1. Plus 1 in this case. We haven't got to the 10 case. Sorry if I confuse you. This is equal to points plus 1. All right? This, as you can see, is a little bit kind of lengthy. It would take a little while to write. Programmers, it turns out, are usually they want to save as many keystrokes as possible. People say lazy. I don't think that's a good word to describe programmers. I think you just want to type less wherever possible. So hopefully you can see that this is definitely less typing and shorter, and in my opinion, actually easier to understand than this case right here. Okay. Let's look at a couple others. So if I was to do let score equal to 20, and I do score minus minus in this case, you can see that I'm actually going to go down by 1, right? So score is 19, right? If I did this another time, it would go down one more time, right? So I'll do this again. You can see it goes down to 18. Okay. Generally, you wouldn't want to do something like this. A better way to do this would be the next operator that I'll show you. So if I was to say score plus equals and then a number, like say 10, or let's just say 6, just to make it a little bit less samey, and I run this, you can see that I've, didn't save my code, I didn't log the value. You can see that I'm making mistakes as we go. Score is now 24. Okay, we minus minus twice, we got to 18. Then we added 6 all at once and got to 24. Why do we need this kind of plus equals, right? If we have the plus plus, technically we could have just done score plus plus 6 times, right? But you can imagine if we had something like this, where we had score plus equals like 100, right? That would get kind of crazy. So that's why we should only use plus plus if it's up by 1, and minus minus if it's down by 1. If you're doing stuff like this, generally just use the plus equals or the minus equals. So the minus equals looks the same. You can say minus equals 50, and I'll go negative now. If I run this, you can see I always forget to log it out. Console log. It's good practice. You can see that I've gone up to 110, and then I've gone down to 63. Okay, so this is score plus equals 100 right here. So 18 plus 100, and then 118 minus 50. Okay, great. So now I'll just go through the multiply cases just so you can see examples of that. And then I'll just show a diagram just to make it a bit extra clear before we wrap up this one. So if I say something like let age equal to 7, and I say age multiply equal to 2, this is the same thing as saying age equals to age times 2. So in this case, this 7 is going to go here, right here on the left-hand side, and then we're multiplying 7 by 2, we're getting 14 and putting that back into age. And this works only because we're using a let assignment, right? If we were using a const assignment, we can't change age, and this line here, line 16 in my case, would actually fail. Okay, so I'm gonna console log this out. You can see I'm learning as we go. I don't forget to log this out. And clear my screen just so that we have some space. I know I have a lot of numbers going on here, but in this case, 14 is the value that we were interested in. These were from points and score above, all right? And if we say after we multiply it by 2, we can then divide it by 2 again. So we can say divide equals 2, just like that, and then we can log out the age one more time, and now we should be back at 7. Right, so we went up to 14, and then now we're back at 7. The really tricky ones that look kind of weird, especially since they're kind of new operators for a lot of us as we're learning coding, are the modulus and the exponentiation. So let's take a look at those really quick. So exponentiation equals, or sorry, modulus equals in this case. I got ahead of myself. This is the same thing as if we were to write this out long form, which I'll show you in a second. But if I said, let's say in this case, age is 7. So I'll say age is 7 here. If I modulus 7 with itself, I should get 0 because it divides exactly into itself. So let me confirm that, make sure I know how to actually still do math. Clear this out, and I get 0, which is right here. Okay, so this is the same as doing age is equal to age mod, and then in this case 7. All right, play around with the different numbers and see how that looks as you kind of learn how modulus works a little bit more, just so you can get more practice. Finally, let's look at exponentiation. This one is extra weird because it's kind of like 3 long. But let's take a look at how that works. So we'll say multiply in this case is exponentiate equals, right? So you can see why this looks a little bit strange because it's unlike the other ones. It's kind of even more crazy looking than this one, I guess. And multiply equals exponentiate. Let's exponentiate it by 2. Actually, in this case, we'll get nothing because we have 0. So I'm actually going to comment this out real quick. Just so that we can see this working. I could change the modulus, but I'll comment that out for now. And then I'll say console.log, and I'll say age. All right, so we should get 7 squared in this case, which is 49. Okay, so this is taking 7, which is 7 right here, and squaring it. 7 times 7 is 49. Okay. Wonderful. So to kind of go through a little bit of the visuals behind this, just so it really clicks, I made this diagram. On the left-hand side, we have the shorthand operator. And on the right-hand side, we have the kind of longer form. Let's go through the right-hand side first, just so we can see how that translates into the short form, just to be super clear. So here we have height equal to 100 to start. And then we're saying take height and add 5 to it right here, right here. We're saying 100 plus 5, right? Because height is 100 to start, but then we're saying 100 plus 5, and we're putting that back into height. And this works because height is a let statement. If the height was a const, we couldn't do this second line right here. We'd get an error. So we're saying 100, add 5 to it, and then put that back into height. So height is 105 in this case. This can be shortened to the left-hand side, right? And you can see the translations to kind of where these symbols would end up if that's a bit helpful to you. So same thing here, height is 100, height plus equals 5 also ends up with height being 105. So these two do the exact same thing. I would encourage you to stick with whichever one you're most comfortable with. As you get more and more comfortable, you'll maybe grow to appreciate that it's fun to save a bit of keystrokes and maybe even a bit more concise when it comes to the code. So again, up to you, whichever is more clear for you and for the people that you're working with. I will eventually start doing this a bit more because I like to write a bit more concise code and not kind of have too much going on the screen all at once. Okay. Wonderful. I hope that was valuable to you. I know this was a tricky topic. There's quite a lot going on. What I've done is made a problem set video alongside this video just to kind of get a bit more practice with a few more problems to see if you can work through them and see if you can get the answers yourself. If you found this video helpful, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. As well, I'd love to hear your comments in the comment section below. If you're running into any issues, feel free to message me in there as well, and I'll reply to you as soon as I can. In the next video, what we're going to do is those problem sets that I mentioned, and if you're looking for more practice, definitely check those out. If not, we're going to also create another video on Boolean operators, which is the next type of operator which I mentioned, which is going to be a whole new series of fun together. I'll see you there.